Humphries to the stage.
Ridiculous. How long are we playing in Birmingham?
Only 1 week, I think.
How ridiculous. We could play here for a year.
Sorry.
Are they fully vaccinated?
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
Have you told them it's the world premiere of this show?
No.
Why not?
Well, they might think you're under-rehearsed and ask for their money back.
Money back. Yes, we are north, aren't we? They could easily in Birmingham. Is this conversation going through the microphone? Do they hear us?
I think they can, yeah.
Oh, shit.
Let's get on with it.
Let's get on with it.
Good evening, and welcome to this evening's performance of The Man Behind the Mask. Patrons are advised that this evening's show may contain violence, strong language, sexual references, and with any luck, nudity.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Humphries and I'm a recovering comedian. I love this theatre. It's wonderful to be here. I suppose you're all wondering what's going to happen tonight. You're not alone. No, but this, when you think that this survived the Blitz, not the Germans, the town council. I like Birmingham because it's so central. 20 minutes you can be somewhere nice, can't you? In my job in the theatre, I've created quite a few characters and played a lot of different characters. But there's one character I haven't fully explored, and that's myself. So tonight is going to be, well, the show is an attempt at an honest self-portrait. Question knowing where to start. My story begins in Melbourne, Australia in the mid-1930s. Now you're doing a bit of mental arithmetic. But it may surprise you that, considering my youthful appearance, I'm approaching my mid-60s. From the wrong direction. Being on stage is my happy place. Whatever's happened during the day, whatever catastrophes, what minor vexations, whatever goes wrong, I get in on here and I think to myself, alone at last. Ben, how was my entrance then?
Fantastic.
Lively, you know. Well, it's always been difficult. My entrances have always been a problem ever since I started off in the professional theatre. And it's an important part of an actor's craft too, how you enter. One of the first productions I was ever in was in Twelfth Night, my favourite Shakespeare play, and I played Prince Orsino there. That's a very rare photograph of the young actor, 21, I suppose I was. Well, it was in period clothing. I don't know what period it was. I had to wear a doily round my neck, and I was very madly miscast as Prince Orsino in Twelfth Night. And I had to wear tights. Now, I in those days a sort of slightly romantic appearance as a young actor. It's a bit puffy, isn't it? I mean that in all due respect. I don't know if he cancelled before I've done the show. But that was my actor's photograph early on, the cigarette, you see, inevitably. What sort of role would I have got? Perhaps a small part in the professionals, I think. Or Z-cars, or something. Or Crossroads. And I had to wear tights. I mean, I was very embarrassed walking on stage in tights. And I was sure on the first night that I heard a titter. A titter is something that lives in theatres. And occasionally it scampers around, it might meet another titter. And if it meets a few and they all titter together, with any luck you get a standing ovation. But I mean, well, I did notice it. And I used to come on, so embarrassed about my legs, I'd come on stage and I'd come behind a chair. If music be the food of love, play on. After 3 performances, the director took me aside and he said, "Your entrance is terrible." He said, "You skulk. You hide behind the furniture." He said, "What's the matter with you?" I said, "John, it's my legs." You're laughing at my legs. He said, "Ridiculous." He said, "You've got very nice legs." He said, "Very nice legs," he said. May I feel them? He didn't say that because that sort of thing didn't happen then. He said, "Your legs are perfectly okay." He said, "You must realise that you are naturally ridiculous." Well, that's not encouraging news to a younger actor. But it taught me one important thing. I was in the wrong department of the theatre. I should have been in comedy. You know, and that I corrected as soon as I possibly could. And I'm thankful for my ridiculous legs, because they've carried me through a long career and ended me up in Birmingham. So I was in the Melbourne Rep, and it was the only repertory company in Australia. And a man joined the company soon after I had, called George Pravda, and George came from Czechoslovakia. He was a refugee from fascism, and because he was a foreigner, he was a guru too. He was a bit of a know-all, I must admit. And he took me aside, and he said to me, he said, "So you want to be an actor? I mean, that's my foreign voice." It's perfect, isn't it? I mean, I use that for any foreign role, including Chinese. He said, "Look, to be an actor, you have to have it in 3 places." He said, "You have to have it here, and then you have to have it here, and then you need to have it." He said, you have it here? That was it. In a few words, he castrated me, and I was naturally ridiculous and a eunuch at the same time. 1955, before your grandparents were born, I was in the Melbourne Rep, and I was in a play called Design for Living by Noel Coward. It was sort of an Art Deco comedy, and I played the husband, Ernest. It was about a sort of ménage à trois, really. And I played Ernest the husband with grey hair and a false moustache. It was a major role. And I had a big scene with my wife in the second act. My wife was played by a very experienced Melbourne actress called June Brunel. And as in rep, as you all understand it, we were learning one play in the week at night and doing another in the morning. We were rehearsing a new play, and at night we were playing. So it was very hard work, and I was in bed at my parents' place. I was still living at home. After the curtain came down, I got home and I was learning the next play, Design for Living, my big role. It was about the most important part I'd been given. There was a lot of things happening in my personal life, and as there is in everyone's, and I had the script in my bedside table, and every night I'd get home very tired after the show, and I'd have to learn, because we were opening the next week. I had to learn my part, and I had great difficulty in learning. I studied my role until I fell asleep almost, and I put the script in the bedside drawer. Well, suddenly it was opening night, and I had the first act down very well in my head. In the second act, pretty good, but it was a bit on page 26, halfway down. I had trouble with it. It was a sort of thrombosis, a block. I couldn't get past it, but I thought I do know it. So when the time comes, I'll just relax a bit, and I will have picked it up by osmosis. So I left the script in the bedside drawer, went to the theatre, and it was opening night. The first night went very, very well. I mean, the laughter was flowing across the footlights. It was a lovely experience. I had it down perfectly, and everyone was very happy. Second act, I had this nagging worry, but it was going very, very well till we got to page 25. And in my mind, I was turning the pages of the script, and I could see the bit coming up where I had the problem. And then finally we got to it. It was a big scene between me and my stage wife, Gilda, played by June. We got to that bit, and I dried up. It was a very long pause, and June said, do you feel you need to say something, Ernest? I said, yes, I do. I do need to say something, desperately. She said, and what do you want to say? I said, it's in the drawer. She said, what drawer, Ernest? She played along. She was very good at improvising. Sweat was breaking out on my forehead. There was a bureau on the other side of the stage, and June, enterprisingly, ran across. She opened a drawer, and she said, it's not in here. Now, the sweat had begun to erode the adhesive under my false moustache. She said, I think I know what you're trying to say. So I said, for Christ's sake, tell me what it is. I was losing my grip. So was my moustache. She looked up blankly at her clean-shaven husband. I knew my character was on the stage somewhere. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, Noel Coward wouldn't have recognized his play. I I struggled along and I finally remembered a line. I picked it up, but I'd skipped 20 pages. The audience couldn't believe how early they were getting out of the theatre. There was no one asking for their money back. They didn't notice a thing. Audiences are going, they can be very stupid. With one exception. Well, not so my leading ladies. Very unforgiving was June. When we had got to the curtain call, we were bowing, audience applauding, some even stood up. She said to me, "I'll never speak to you again," she said, and she didn't. Later on I heard she married a German refugee photographer called Helmut Newton, later quite famous, especially for his erotic photography. So June, my leading lady, spent the rest of her life in black PVC and a whip. After that, I decided never to be in other people's place. I had to make up my own lines, so it didn't matter if I forgot them. And that's what tonight is all about. My colleague Edna, if she's on stage, improvising with the audience, which she does rather well, I'm lurking in the wings, watching, and saying to myself, I wish I'd thought of that. I was in an Uber in London the other day, and I noticed on the dashboard that I like to get in the front seat, you see, because I'm an Australian and we're very egalitarian. We don't mind the smell of garlic, faintly smelling, well, whatever it Am I cancelled? Well, anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I noticed on the dashboard a handsome volume and a Morocco-bound autograph book. So I knew what was coming, and when we got to the destination, the driver said to me, as I had thought he would you mind if I had your autograph? I said, certainly, graciously as I can be. And I reached this lovely book. He said, "Oh, not that time, if you don't mind, sir." And he reached under his seat. He pulled out a notebook, dog-eared, coffee-stained, horrible little thing. He said, "Would you write in this, I keep the other one for celebrities." Of course, I signed it with my nom de plume, Sir Lawrence Olivier. I've had some very funny experiences in the back of taxis. And I think you have, madam. Once in New York, the driver, I had a typical New York taxi driver, and he leaned me back in his seat after we'd been going a few blocks, and he said, "Are you an actor?" I said, "That's my American taxi driver." Very similar to my Venezuelan voice. He said, "You're an actor." I said, "Matter of fact, I am." He said, "You're a comic actor." I said, "Well, yes, I am. How did you know that?" He said, "You've got a big nose." After 2 blocks, he spoke again. He said, "Are you Jewish?" I said, "Well, no, I don't think I am, but I wouldn't mind in the least if I was." He said, "Oh, so you got your nose for nothing?" is that people who've seen me on the TV, or you know, and I mean, I've been in interviews and things, for example, or more recently, something like Saturday Kitchen, which I was on Saturday Kitchen, and I thought it was a very good show. And the food, it looks delicious. Just as when I had the Gaviston, but I mean, they recognise you see, because I'm not dressed up in some other character, and so I can't complain about it. It's very nice. People accost me and they say things like, "Oh, I don't want to interrupt your privacy," when they are, of course. And in Australia, there's this funny expression they use. People come up and say, "You don't know me from a bar of soap." Bar of soap? Well, I think it's a colonial thing. If I could say that word. Colonial thing. I mean, I think there used to be soap which came in bars, anonymous, without perfume of any kind, and they'd break off a bit. That was soap. But these days, of course, it's more sophisticated. There's a great variety of soaps. And, well, it's an indication, an index of class, I suppose, and culture. I mean, for example, Adam, what kind of soap do you have in your house? What? Liquid soap. Well, that's practical too, isn't it? You, madam, what's your household soap? Dove, yes, it comes in those nice boxes, doesn't it? Dove, it's very successful. And you look very clean. What soap do you have at home? Not you, her. You're a ventriloquist, are you? You'll explain why your hand is up her dress. What? Joe Malone. You're the voice of the proletariat. Joe Malone. Very good. Wonderful. Is it the basil and amber or... Wait a minute. I can smell it. We had at home, we had Palmolive. We all had Palmolive soap. But for guests, we had something called Cashmere Bouquet. It was wrapped, and my mother left it for guests. And after 2 years, the package got a bit grubby. But there was a boy at my school who was actually not terribly well off background, and we went to his place for a birthday party, and I noticed they had something called Solvol, which was grey and abrasive, a bit like Swafiga, as a matter of fact. You're a Swafiga woman. I said to my mother, "Can we have some Solvol, please?" And she certainly not. She said, "That's for common people." With dirty hands, she said. Dirty hands, I thought that was what soap was all about, but I learned these class distinctions, which are so subtle and in a way so funny and pathetic, really. However, there's another soap called Pears we sometimes had. You know, Pears?
Yes.
You can see through it. That was the point of it. It said so you can see who wants to look at things through a cake of soap? Can you imagine going out with the family and saying, "Oh, what a lovely view. Anyone got some soap?" I'm beginning to feel like a stand-up. Another popular stranger's approach is this we dread. I'm going to take you back now. Take you back. Yes, I'm going to take you back now to Melbourne. Second week of October 1974. Ring a bell? Not at the moment. You were doing a show at the Comedy Theatre in Melbourne. It was a cold, blustery night. Now do you remember? We came to that stage door, my wife and I, and you signed my wife's program before we could tell you that it was for Eunice. Eunice is my wife's cousin, twice removed, as a matter of fact. Now is it coming back to you now? We didn't tell you at the time, but the amazing coincidence was that Eunice used to teach Sunday school with Maureen Longmire. She was the godmother of the sister-in-law of the lady who nearly bought the house 3 doors down from your sister. Isn't it a small world? I overhear sometimes people talking about me in the street. And because I've been on things and I'm a minor celebrity, if I may say so, they feel they know me. And they feel I'm not a person, really. I'm a thing. A thing that has appeared on television, not really a person at all. So they can talk about me quite loudly, very loudly, standing next to me. There was a couple the other day. There was a man and a woman, middle-aged. And I'm here, and he's there. He says to his wife, "That's him." That is him. She says, "No, it isn't. That is him." He's not as old as that. He says, "That definitely is arguing." And then she says, ask him. All right. You ask him. Oh, you ask him. All right, I'll ask him. Excuse me, sir. We were just having a conversation about you. Go on. I don't interrupt your privacy. Do you happen to be very Humphries? I said my graciousness. Mentioned my graciousness before. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I am. He says, oh, my wife can't stand you. I was born in Melbourne, in the suburb of Camberwell. Now, Melbourne, which was in the late 19th century, the richest city in the world. It liked to pretend it was part of the home counties. Towns and suburbs like, well, Camberwell, Kew, Richmond, Kensington, Brighton, Malvern, Brighton. Melbourne prided itself too on its respectability. And we had Winston Churchill calendar behind the kitchen door in the war. We poured tea from a thatched cottage teapot. We listened to Vera Lynn on the radio or the wireless. Our streets and parks were lined with elm trees. And they're still there. It's like a museum, an arboreal museum. We didn't want to think for a moment that we lived in a remote part of Southeast Asia. Many of the houses on our street were built by my father, He was a stylish exponent. He was a builder, successful builder, an exponent of domestic architecture. He could build a house in any of the fashionable styles of the late 1930s. Young couples would come around and sit in the front room with my dad and decide what kind of house, what kind of lovely home they would inhabit. They went away very happy, having decided to have a house or a home in the Spanish mission style, the Barlashua columns, or the Californian bungalow was popular. This is our street. Or jazz moderne, neo-Tudor, Elizabethan, mock Elizabethan. My father's repertoire was endless. We lived in a, that was his favourite style. He could have been the art director of Poirot, couldn't he? But we lived in a two-story, the biggest house in the street, of course, a two-story neo-Georgian house with a fanlight over the front door and a tradesman's entrance, a special entrance for tradesmen with a sign on the gate saying no hawkers or canvassers. I never knew what that meant. Hawkers, I thought, what's my mother doing buying birds? Canvassers was a total mystery to me. Today I'm rather pleased to know that our little suburb, Hartford, created by my dad, is now visited by groups of architecture students who've come to study the domestic architecture of Melbourne in the 1930s. It's a museum of architectural styles. Later on, more recently, it occurred to me that my parents were actually quite rich by standards of the time, and not conspicuous, not like you, madam. I mean, what style of house do you live in, by the way?
1930s house.
A 1930s house. Wonderful. What style is it? Think back.
Just like that one.
Like that one?
Yeah.
Is it? Really? Wonderful. Well, you have a nice bathroom. Is it in that style as well?
Yeah.
What colour is your bathroom?
White.
White, yes. Well, it's reliable, isn't it? Of course, now there's a variety of colours. Avocado, for example. Avocado. Is there anyone here with an avocado bathroom? What? Oh. You have? Where? Oh, an avocado bath. Good. Do you have an avocado toilet seat? The toilet seat is avocado? They're quite valuable, you know. Don't sell it, just sit on it, because you could take it to Antique Roadshow one day. I love Antique Roadshow. I love these demonstrations of insatiable greed. When I did my first one-man show in Melbourne, it was called The Nice Nights Entertainment. And it was reviewed in the Melbourne Age newspaper, very favourably, I'm happy to say. The headline was, "Our House is Funny." What about that for a headline for a theatre show? Of course, it's because I discovered something. I discovered that people laugh at their immediate environment when it's drawn to their attention. People didn't think anything so close to them could possibly be funny. I mean, imagine 10 years ago, people laughing at the idea of an avocado bathroom. So I was a bit, kind of fatuously self-satisfied about that. A friend of mine lived in a house my father built. Her name was Valerie Dunn. She's the girl in the middle, the ill-favoured girl. That's kid on the bike. My sister is driving the car on the right. Now, Valerie is the girl I tried to poison. Because I love that movie, Snow White. And I liked the bit about the poisoned apple. I loved that. So I thought I'd make one and give it to Valerie. I got some pastry from my mother. She was making a pie. Some offcuts of pastry. I rolled them up. I coloured it with cochineal. Coloured with cochineal. And I injected it with fly spray. With a hypodermic needle from a diabetic woman in our street. I watched Valerie take a bite out of it. Unfortunately, she didn't die. Unfortunately. It's a good image though, isn't it? I don't seem to have a care in the world. I look rather angelic, I think. What's that? Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. That's from The Wizard of Oz, it's not from Snow White, I'm sorry. Must you interrupt this show constantly? At my first school, actually at my primary school, there was a bully, a notorious bully. It happened to be me. Very small, delicate boy. Very delicate boy called Bruce Gifford. Bruce Gifford, it's funny how names come back to you. Bruce Gifford. Bruce Gifford was a lovely kid, smaller than us, beautifully dressed. He'd come to school, his mother would bring him to school, and he had a cut lunch, beautiful sandwiches, beautifully wrapped up, expressive of maternal love, if ever any object could be. But in a dispute with little Bruce, I knocked them into the playground accidentally. I knocked his lunch into the dirt and the dust of the playground. I still have a kind of mental video of the sandwiches unfurling. Tomato and lettuce, cheese, and falling into the filth, and then someone trod on them. Again, me. Those sandwiches, look, the guilt has stayed with me, preyed on me for years. For many years, I woke up at night sometimes feeling the guilt, the horrible guilt of being a nasty bastard to this day. And 20 years ago I was in Melbourne, seeing family, and I thought I'd have to try and find if Gifford was still alive. And I looked him up in the phone book. Remember them? And there he was, Bruce Gifford. Gifford Bruce, architect. So I dialed the number. Hello? Oh, Bruce. Is this Bruce Gifford? No, it's his wife here. Who is this? I said, it's Barry Humphries here. I waited a moment in order to hear the awestruck gasp. It was not forthcoming. I said, may I speak to Bruce, please? Bruce! Bruce! He came to the phone. Hello? I said, Bruce Gifford, who is this? I said, it's Barry Humphries. Bruce, do you remember Camberwell Primary School, 1941? Yes. I wanted to know if you were there at that school, Bruce. Who is this calling, please? I was there. Who is this? I said, Bruce, I just wanted to apologise about the sandwiches. The sandwiches? He said, yes, your sandwiches. They fell into the playground and they were covered in dirt and dust. I trod on them. And I just wanted to say sorry. Sorry, Bruce. 60 years later, I felt I should apologise. I knocked your lunch onto the playground and it's tormented me ever since. Who is this called? Who is this? And I slowly replaced. But I felt so much better. I was bullied, of course. His name was John Bromley. Fancy remembering that name. This Bromley, he had soft white skin. I called him caterpillar skin. Well, he was a big fellow and I was sort of Gifford size. Always tripped me up when I went past. I hated him and I hoped that I would never see him again. But I did. Years later, at the university, I was working at the theatre, which was on the campus, and on the lawn, beside the stage door, peacefully leaning against a tree, reading a textbook, I recognized Bromley. A surge of desire for vengeance just overwhelmed me. I rushed into the theatre, down under the stage where there was a scene dock, where they painted the scenery. And I picked up a big bag of white pigment, about 5 pounds of it anyway. I took it outside, I went through the lawn, behind the shrubs, bushes and things, and I was behind the tree against which Bromley blithely leant, reading. And I called his name. I said, Bromley. At that point I released the entire contents of that bag over him. I enveloped him, an avalanche of white pigment. And then I ran as fast as I could to the security of the theatre, only looking back once, and when I did, I saw a white figure, totally white, like a Pierrot, standing, frozen, in horror, in amazement, horror, dismay, God knows what. A pillar of salt, a bit like Lot's wife in the Bible, when she's turned into a pillar of salt at the destruction of Sodom. I like to try to introduce a biblical note into my speech. And I felt huge relief after I'd done that, but I must admit to you, and I'm admitting this for the first time, I felt a little twinge of regret because, hard to confess, but I'm going to tell you, when I said Bromley and released the bag of white stuff, he looked up. And I saw that it wasn't Bromley. I'm sorry. It was something. Oh, sorry, there's a gentleman leaving here. I'm sorry, sir. Will you be long? Will you be long? Does this often happen? Don't laugh. Incontinence is not funny. Who's with him? Should we wait? When he comes back, if he comes back, that's it's Bromley. If he comes back, I'll give you a little signal, and you just go to feeling better. Tip me off when he comes in. So, there are very few photographs of my mother. Now that's a drawing I did because I forgot to mention. What an accomplished artist I am. And that's a sketch I did of my mother in the garden. But whenever we took the film, the family film, back to the chemist, we used to have to take film to the chemist and it would be developed there. And my mother would get the film and she'd tear up every picture of herself. So there's not a lot left and they're not always very good ones. But that's us on a little cruise, I think, some time ago. And it was hard really to read my mother. I mean, she was paradoxical. She could be a severe critic, oh yes, and she could be really a very supportive ally. I mean, she sent me to art classes behind my father's back because I had such, I was a very gifted young artist, had huge promise, enormous promise. My works are sometimes available on Amazon. And on Saturday mornings, I was only about 16, and I'd go to art classes because there was a real artist in Melbourne who had a studio in his suburban house, and it would be a gathering place for artists in corduroy trousers, berets, and beards. And I joined them, and the main thing, attraction for me, was the model, because it was a young woman, completely naked, standing in the room. We'd all have to draw her. It got very cold sometimes in Melbourne, so she stood next to a stove, and one half of it was pink and the other was blue. So she was a living Picasso. My mother also paid for my driving lessons. And my father didn't think I could possibly drive, so this was all done behind his back. And I still drive. I had my license taken away some time ago. And I've driven better ever since. I drive very fast. I like to see my passengers white knuckles, to see their feet attempting to burst through the four throttle of the car. I've often been asked, by the way, talking to my mother, if Edna was based on her, and I've always denied it, of course, to spare my family's feelings. I strenuously denied it. But since she passed away, I feel I can definitely say to you that some aspects of Dame Edna are inherited from my mother's character. And also based on a lot of aunties. I had a huge number of aunties, and I had a nanny called Edna, who I absolutely loved. My mother was a mistress of the vocabulary of discouragement. She often said to me, in front of guests, she'd say, "We don't know where Barry came from." You don't want to hear that, do you? If you're young. I would sometimes,
feeling better.
Sometimes go to this art class and it was a naked model, see? In cold weather, one half of it was would stand outside our house, looking up and down the street, wondering if my real parents would turn up. After the birth of my son Oscar, I took him around to see my mother. And we went round to the house, family house, and there in the sunroom was my mother in her favourite chair, and she was listening to the radio. And it happened to be one of those phone-in programs where people can ring up and share their latest, fellow with the compere, who was a fellow called Darren Hinch. And to my astonishment, the program was on the subject of me when we arrived at the house. And listeners were calling up with their character assessments. As Oscar and I entered the house, my mother was really listening hard to the radio. And there was a woman saying, "I haven't seen one of Barry's shows, and I don't need to, Darren. He goes overseas and he makes fun of Australian womanhood in a shameless and unpatriotic way. I think it's disgusting and the government should stop it." My mother turned to us and she said, "You see, that's what people think of you, Barry. That's what people think of you." I was furious. I took my little boy into the other room. I went into my father's den. I decided I would call the radio station. And I would pretend to be Edna. Something I do quite well. Hello, it's Edna here. Could I speak to Darren Hinch? In a moment, I was on the show. "Good morning, Darren. I love your show. I love it. I've been listening to those nice women talking about Barry Humphries, who I happen to know. I have had the misfortune to be on the same stage. He mocks our wonderful country. He ridicules our womenfolk and our values. He's an embezzler and a disgrace. He is ruining our tourist industry with his grotesque caricature of all that is noble in Australian life. Barry Humphries is a traitor. And I happen to know his mother agrees with me." Went back into the room. My mother had turned off the radio. She gave me the strangest look. And then she said, "May I hold my grandson?" This is the only footage in existence of my father. It was taken by Alf Dunn. Alf Dunn was our neighbour and the father of Valerie, who I poisoned. Alf was an amateur filmmaker, a bit like Baz Luhrmann. When I did my first show in Melbourne, the box office manager was called Gloria. And I said to Gloria, "Oh, how's it going?" And she said, "I saw your father this morning." I said, "My father?" She said, "Yes, he came in. He wanted to buy every ticket in the theatre to give to his mates at the golf club." Well, I said, "Gloria, what did you say?" She said, "Well, I said, we're sold out." She said, "I've never seen a man so astonished." She was gobsmacked. I had to sit him down and give him a glass of water. Well, my sister and I had a dressing up box. You know, dressing up is something kids love. It's always rather sad if it persists until adult. My favourite costume was a sailor suit. is sometimes on Sunday afternoons when we went out to see the uncles and the aunties, when both sides of the family would meet and submerge their mutual hostilities with cups of tea, sandwiches, and cake. On these occasions, gruesome occasions, I would sometimes be persuaded to do a party turn. Something, of course, you might have noticed I've been doing on and off ever since. In the old days, when I was at home doing a party turn, my mother would say, "Don't look at Barry, he's drawing attention." Well, that's become a lucrative career even in Birmingham. So, I would sing this song called "Nymphs and Shepherds Come Away." I'd never seen the words written down, and since at the time we were at war with Japan, I would assume, with childish innocence, the song was called "Nymphs and why they should come away and not go away, I never understood. Of course, I didn't know, we didn't know. We were wildly worried about the invasion of the Japanese. Only we'd known that all they wanted to do was shop. How could we have known that? To make matters worse, I learned that the song was composed by someone called Purcell, which is what my mother used to wash the sets. When I was talking about the production of Twelfth Night, I forgot to tell you that, well, we took that show on tour. Quite a few productions here at the Birmingham Rep. Many have gone on tour, and it's fun, really. I saw for the first time a lot of country towns in my home state of Victoria. Because, at school we didn't learn about Australia. We learned where Huddersfield was. It's your twin city. You must try and do better. Wolverhampton. We knew all about the products of these towns, but I'd heard nothing at all about Brisbane, Adelaide, or Perth, or the Outback. What was that? Some place we learned one afternoon's geography class, where a few men with beards in the 19th century had gone and never come back. Explorers, apparently. So, in the bus, our little company, we're in a bus and we're going to a trip from one country town to the next, and we'd entertain ourselves with jokes and songs and stories. And at the back of the bus, I would sit sprawled, and I'd contribute my very popular impersonation of the lady mayoress of the next town. Because after each show, we'd go into a little hall and there'd be a big spread, with hungry, underpaid actors. And the mayoress or some prominent lady of the community would give a speech thanking us for bringing culture to our town. In those days, I had a rather good and penetrating falsetto voice. And I imagined what the mayoress would say to us after the next after-show supper. Something like, My name is Marigold Whittle, and everyone calls me Goldie. What a wonderful night that we have had tonight. And thank you to these lovely young actors and actresses from the Melbourne Rep who have given us this delightful Shakespearean type show. 12 nights. very important meeting of the ladies' knitting circle. But above all, I hope you all enjoy this scrumptious supper. And thank you, Mrs. Woodbridge, for your sausage surprise. Which was more surprising than ever tonight. And I'm sure the lovely actors and actresses from Melbourne appreciated Mrs. Kendall's sponge fingers. Always a firm favourite with the menfolk. Thank you, Mrs. Kendall, for your famous fingers so soon after burying your husband. After that little speech or something like it, the mayoress would pause for applause. But the applause was usually one-handed, or rather a sort of Zen applause, because we all had one of Mrs. Kendall's fingers and a beverage in the other. But from that type of experience, I constructed a character, a fictitious and genteel Australian housewife called Edna Evan. Now, I found this in the pocket of a very old jacket in my parents' place. I couldn't work out what it was, but of course it's very poignant. It's the end of a streamer. And I've had that for 63 years. It takes me back to March 1959. I was leaving Melbourne to sail to Europe, third class, on an Italian ship called the Toscana. And to farewell me on the dock was my father. Well, he was holding the other end of the stream, and it tightened as the boat pulled out. You can imagine my emotions, holding this, my last link with my childhood. And then it snapped. But I kept it. Well, I didn't know I had my father. You see, I was starting to do very well, really quite well in Australia. And I thought, if things get any better than that, this I'd become a minor celebrity before the word was invented. So the problem was, I might never have the courage to leave. And I wanted to go to England. My grandfather came from Bath, Manchester. It was home. A lot of Australians call England home. And I wanted to learn more about my job, even if it meant neglect and obscurity, which is exactly what I got. After 5 weeks at sea, Toscana landed in Venice. It docked in Venice. Imagine your first sight of Europe, Venice. Canal San Marco, the first time I'd ever seen a building more than 100 years old. Like arriving in Birmingham. By the time I reached London, I'd spent all my savings in Italy. I had only 4pence in my pocket, enough for a phone call. I found my sister, who was on an obligatory trip, and she was living in London, and I borrowed £20, which I'm sure you overpaid. I think I overpaid. It was enough to get me going in a bed-sitting room in Notting Hill Gate, the cheapest part of London, long before it was Hugh Gruntified. I auditioned for shows in the daytime, and at night I had a job on the night shift in Wall's Ice Cream Factory in Acton. I was in the Raspberry Ripple department. And at auditions in the daytime, I was convinced that the tempting aroma of Raspberry Ripple wafted across the floor. And the producers and casting agents in the audience in a darkened auditorium would be tempted to run out and buy an ice cream. I was fired after a month from the factory for daydreaming and getting the conveyor belt jammed up with ruptured boxes of raspberry ripple, setting off alarms, sirens, the whole place ground to a halt. But luckily, soon after that, I got a part in a rather attractive musical called Sweeney Todd. It wasn't Stephen Sondheim's famous Sweeney Todd. It was an earlier version which Steve had not heard of. But it was a lovely little show. I played the madhouse keeper. I had 2 songs. So I was off and running. We had 6 weeks rehearsal with no money, 2 weeks in the theatre, closed on Christmas Eve, after only 12 performances. That was in the 50s. In those days, a long time ago, in the 50s, if you see the professionals, you look at the streets, that's what it looked like. No traffic, really. You could walk down the street. I was a failed actor. The only show I'd had had closed down, and no one recognised me. But these days it is different. And I was in Sydney at Christmas, and I was looking in the shop window, and I heard a voice calling out my name, or a kind of foul abbreviation of it. Some people call Barry Bazza. I heard a voice saying, "Hi, Bazza!" I looked, and there was indeed a youth, all that implies, parking his motorcycle. He had a shaved head, and he had a tattoo like a sort of fungus creeping up the side of his face and claiming his whole head. And I looked again at him, and I thought, oh, there's trouble. He said again, "Hey, Bertha!" Our eyes met. He said, "You're a fucking icon!"
Leaving the Humphries stable. I don't need him. I can go out on my own. I was somebody before I ever met him. I put him on the map. I put so many shillings in that boy's pocket. People come to see his shows. He thinks to see him. They come to see me. There's no question of that in my mind. However, that's his life. He's got to lead it. He's made his bed. He has to sleep in it. Mike, I'm sorry, but he does.
There's no bitterness already.
No, there's no bitterness whatsoever.
As a mother, if you had a son who dressed up in women's clothes, what would you do then?
I'd hope it was a passing phase. But after, if years passed and he still did it, I would seek medical advice. I would. Or I'd make sure they were nice women's clothes. Like Carlos Lampatti or someone like that. And I need to take action against this man because he says he dressed up, I coached him, and he is staying there. He said, do you think, frankly, would the royal family of England, Mother Teresa, the President of the United States, or even Tom Cruise's parents, want the autograph of a sick female impersonator? I don't think so. I'm sorry, do you viewers? No. In the testimony of these women, not just women, a few retrenched men as well.
It was a great relief to me when she stopped persecuting me and went to Hollywood.
And away was a friendly farewell.
It's been a fairy tale story, Hollywood.
It was for the best.
I little thought my career would span from rock and roll to rap. Hello, Parsons, Agnes, my name. I'm a mega star. I'm a film stage. I'm a friend of the star. There are lots of hounds and a big rock star.
Edna began as a very shy woman.
I would like to introduce to you a very close friend of mine, Mrs. Norm Everidge, a housewife from 36 Humoresque Street, Mooney Farms. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Norm Everidge.
Excuse I?
She's gone a long way since then.
They found me a better seat.
Mid-1970s, she was a regular guest on the Michael Parkinson Show. A very long time ago, on one of those shows, she was there with Olivia Newton-John, very young Olivia, Elton John, and the legendary star of silent movies and the Sunset Boulevard, Gloria Swanson.
Keeps a very low profile with regard to his illness. As a matter of fact, he never mentioned his prostate, and many times he only mentioned it in passing. As the only time he ever feels it.
You wrote, of course, one of your many cultural achievements. You wrote the well-known international bestseller called...
What's the matter?
Living with a prostate problem, didn't you? It's translated to many languages.
Later on that program, Gloria Swanson talked at great length about the making of Sunset Boulevard. And Edna interrupted and she said, "Oh, Miss Swanson, I thought you were a silent star." When Edna had her own talk show, we could invite anyone we pleased. We had an amazing procession of so-called celebrities. Edna's concept of a TV talk show is a monologue interrupted by total strangers.
You wish you hadn't eaten? I should rather wear your military uniform and your little birthday suit. I see your little bits jiggling around. We have a diffusing. I want your wife to design me a proper one. We've got a smallish one. I like to have it on my own. But Madge slips in like that. I see her nostrils above the surface. You lose the soap, don't you? You lose it in an ordinary bath. In a jacuzzi, the search is almost impossible. I never know whether it's up my end or up Madge's. Thank goodness for soap on the place. I don't think I'd make a very convincing man, Katie. I'm going to talk about something personal. This could offend people. I don't think there's anything that two intelligent women cannot discuss. There's no taboo. I make no apologies for the words, for the terminology, perhaps the coarse terminology that I'm going to use now. first know you were Canadian? When you're part of the Red Sea, now I don't think I'm missing out. You're looking at my Red Sea now. You won't be parking that coffee.
A certain authority. But there was one of my guests who was responsible for giving me the courage to take on America.
A woman who sometimes has a reputation for having an acerbic tongue, but who is basically a refined woman, so refined that she might have been born in Melbourne. And if not a standing ovation, a crouching ovation for Jane Rigger!
Joan became a cherished friend of mine, and at the time when this happened, this encounter, I devised a show that was too elaborate. It was called Edna the Spectacle. It was a big musical based on Edna's life and career. It was at the Haymarket Theatre in London, briefly. Not greatly enjoyed by the critics, but the public loved it, one of them being Joan Rivers. She said after the show, "You must come to the States." She said, "I know a theatre in San Francisco, which will be perfect." She said, "With any luck, the village people will come to the show." Or those that are still alive will come. Well, I did. I booked that theatre Joan had recommended for 2 weeks. It ran for 4 months. It went on to Broadway and won a Tony Award. And after that, a 20-year American career. So the wounds inflicted by the London critics miraculously healed as they did. But opening night, I wish I had one of those recliners that was I seem to, and I'm fine, thanks, Ben. But you could press a button, it would catapult me into the I'd like to do that commercial, by the way. Opening night on Broadway, can you imagine what that means to an actor? Well, the show went very well, like tonight. This must be the best audience we've had. I mean that. Not pissing in your pocket. So sorry. Senior citizens in the audience. On the first night there was a hitch. It came at the end. I might as well tell you about it. Edna noticed a very pretentious woman in the front row. She was wearing sunglasses, sunglasses indoors at the theatre, come on. The French would call it de trop. And Edna persecuted this woman. She kept calling her Four Eyes. Throughout the show, so the woman became almost a member of the cast. And at the end of the show, when it is Edna's custom to invite certain people that she's spoken to, like a little latecomer, a little Mr. Incontinence. Invite them onto the stage to take a bow. So at the end of the show, it was a great build-up. Edna said, "Now, little Four Eyes, come up onto the stage." And as the woman rose, for the first time, I saw the white stick. comfortably in your seat. Only joking. But this wretched creature... insisted on blundering away, trying to get up some steps that led onto the stage with the assistance of some bastards in the audience. And at that moment, a silence fell on her. A deep, profound, a silence which a tragedian would have envied. What? Not good news to a comic. I thought, what's happening? 1 minute ago I was at the top of the world, and now I could see my career going down the toilet very, very quickly. I thought, that's the end of my American career before it even started. The woman was coming toward me. Then I thought, what do you do in motoring? If you skid in the car, what you do is you drive into the skid. So I thought the only situation to this disaster was to make it worse. Much worse. So as this woman wobbled towards me, Edna looked at her and she said, well, at least you didn't bring the dog. The woman dissolved into laughter. The audience followed, and the situation was saved. But while I was trawling through my archives, I came across 2 film clips. You might not have seen them. They're interesting because both of them are prophetic in their own way. The first gem is the Terry Wogan show in 1990. And the second, well, you'll see. But Edna has always claimed to be psychic.
But I think it's a point that Mr. Trump is making there about that calling dog.
Absolutely.
Thank you for asking me if I could call it dog.
Tell me, is there a chance that your husband will leave the business arena and move into the political arena? Do you think you know?
Well, I have been asked this question many times.
Cool.
Now it is still speculation, but you never know with John. He goes in 10 years, whatever he built in 10 years, it's just so phenomenal that there are eventually going to be different fields which he's going to go into. And I'd never say never, and it might be politics one day.
You have never put yourself on the line, and you are a leader. Women would look to you for leadership.
I know, I would. I think I'd be very successful in the political field, but looking at this gorgeous woman, I'm thinking to myself, because I'm a little bit psychic, darling, and I'm thinking, a first lady, yes, your first lady material, you'd be the first lady, didn't look like all the others, wouldn't you? Look, by the way, it's wonderful. It's very entertaining.
Yes, it is.
And it's got lovely photographs of these adorable young people, and I love the one of you standing there caressing your skyscraper. A Tory MP you actually recognise. Please welcome brilliant blonde backbencher Boris Johnson. This little badge on you says Velma is now in the slammer. You're a man who speaks his mind. A man who refuses to learn from his mistakes. That's right.
You should talk more about bicycles, don't you know?
Too late. There's something endearing about this bumbling fellow, don't you? I agree, but I love England. I've always adored a change.
NATO?
I mean, citizens of England, it's a bit overcrowded. There's too many people here.
Yes, I think you're raising the subject of the article I wrote.
Yes.
Yes, that's it. The gist of it was that the overcrowding in the southeast of England could be alleviated if you look at the respective population densities of southern England and northern France, which after all...
It's empty.
Virtually, there's a quarter of the number of people per square mile, and sometimes a sixth in some areas. And if you reflect that after all these were territories, Burgundy, Normandy, Aquitaine, Maine, and so on.
Henry IV, they were. We had them in the days of Henry IV.
Which were part of England, or were owned by England. Then it seems to me that we could alleviate the massive pressure on housing in the southeast, and they're very, very great. We're coming to the point. The point is that we can alleviate this pressure if, and this is where the article momentary lost touch with reality. We can relieve that pressure on the southeast if we enable the people of England more freely to travel and inhabit their former territories in northern France by means of a new
chain war. When Edgar tells the young Donald Trump he's presidential material, he's the one in the middle next to the very pretty woman before surgery. We later heard that Trump had no idea about Edgar's identity. He later said, "Who was that nice Australian woman?" Could Edna have ended up in the White House? Of course, she's managed to dominate this show, but not for long. Let's forget her. And let's take you back to the 1950s in Sydney. I was working in a then famous little revue theatre called the Phillip Street Theatre. It specialised in intimate revue. I shared a dressing room with a much older actor called Max Oldaker. Now, Max was the last of the great Australian matinee idols. He was my mother's great favourite. My mother was not Max's type, though I think possibly my father might have been. I was always asking Max for acting tips. He used to rouge his ears. And I said, "Why do you do that, Max?" He said, "Oh dear boy, it makes you look so young from the front." And I said, "How do you keep that lovely smile?" I said, "On your face at a curtain call after a very bad matinee, a Wednesday matinee with not too many people, and yet you still look charming." He said, "It's a trick, dear boy. I learnt it from Noel." He was always talking about Noel Coward. He'd worked with Noel in the 30s in the West End. And he said, "This is the Noel Coward suggested curtain call." He said, "What you do is you stand in the middle of the stage. Curtain rises, you look at the audience, and you just bow and smile and say, 'Silly cunts.'" If 55, and I was told I needed an agent. Well, I'd never heard of an agent, didn't think I needed an agent, but a few actors I knew had them. Giving away a percentage of a pathetic little salary seemed not a good idea, but it was the thing to do. And one day in a pub, I met one, an agent, a third-rate agent, admittedly, called Ted James was his name. Ted James, and he was a very seedy, nicotine-stained figure. And he said to me, he said, you're in the Club Street show? He said, you must be pretty good. He said, would you like to earn £5 next Sunday morning? £5 seemed a good idea. I said, well, I would, Mr. James. He said, well, look. He said, it's Sunday morning, the show's at 11 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, where is it? He said, the Granville Returned Servicemen's Club. I said, well, where's Granville? He said, oh, it's a hop, skip and a jump. He said, you come out of the airport and you turn in the wrong direction. That's what So you keep on going. So, well, that's what I did. Sunday morning, came up, and I got on the train and went a very long way. Granville seemed a hell of a long trip. And I finally got there, at 11:15, and I went up the main street. I saw the Returned Servicemen's Club, and it was in a broken down old cinema. You know, it was not impressive at all, really. And when I went in, it was thronged with very big men wearing vests and shorts and flip-flops, with huge glasses of freezing cold beer, playing the poker machine, the one-armed bandits. And it didn't look really like my audience, but it didn't matter because in those days I didn't have an audience. I was greeted by a fellow called Les Foxcroft. And Les was the kind of entertainment secretary of the club. And he was the man who was going to pay me. And he said, look, when you get on there, son, he said, welcome, by the way, Brian, but he said, when you get onto the stage, he said, you'll find they really like blue material. They like blue material. Well, actually, I was wearing blue material. I was wearing my Sunday best suit. And I was as naive as that. No sooner did he announced me that I was on the stage. And there were all the string vests, there were all the shorts and the flip-flops, sitting there staring at me. And it suddenly occurred to me that I didn't have an act. I had no act. And I remembered that something I'd done, a sort of expressionist party turn that I'd done at university, which used to clear the room. So I thought I would do that. It's about a psychiatrist. I played both parts, the psychiatrist and his patient. So I speak. First of all, ask him how he is and all that stuff. Then I cross the stage, and then I'm playing the loony. Oh, sorry. Apologies to any institutionalized person. And I'm playing the patient. And what happens in this very long sketch, which could have been written by Samuel Beckett, is they exchange roles, you see. The patient becomes a psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and the psychiatrist goes nuts. I keep crossing and recrossing, but I hadn't crossed the stage more than about twice before the audience left. They all turned their backs on me. They went to the bar, they went back to the fruit bar bags. And I'm left there. Finally, when there was no one in the audience, said, listen, mate, he said, you're a young chap. You don't have to be a comedian, you know. He said, there's a lot of nice jobs out there. You don't have to be a comic. And of course, I felt the same. I think in comedy, being a comedian is very difficult. Not so much now, of course, because you don't have to be funny. But I mean, you don't have to be identified as funny. I vowed I would never be performing in the club again. And it was not until the early 70s that I was offered a very nice fee to perform as Dame Edna, or Mrs. Everett as she still was, in a club called the St. George's Leagues Club in Sydney, which was a very rich, rather grand club. And it was a football club, but they had big people there, you know, Sammy Davis Jr., Liza Minnelli, you know, even Frank Sinatra. So it was intimidating. And I thought, well, you know, it'll be a different audience, but I remembered my days at the Granville Return, my one performance at the Granville Return, and I thought, the singlets, what is it called? String vest. Yes. Well, that string vest is still there, you know. They're just wearing ties and suits, but the same people are there. So I'll come on and there'll be catcalls, won't there? Cries of get off, Pofter, things like that. I was dreading the reaction. So I thought Edna will succeed if someone introduces her, you know, explains a little bit about her. So I invented a new character. You see, I played something a few months before, which required a fat suit. I had this padding, and I could wear this padding, and this padding was very bulky. And the thing about it is, it had an appendage to it. It was, how can I describe this appendage? Tasteful. The appendage tended to struggle against the fabric of the trouser. And it sort of tended to chafe the knee. So I put this padding on, and I put a very large size powder blue suit after that, with stains on it, which I introduced with a bottle of Worcestershire sauce. And then I had some funny teeth. And I came on stage with a drink and a cigarette to introduce everything, eh? I pretended to be the club secretary. Little did I know that the club secretary was identical. Good evening, one and all. My name is Les Patterson. And I happen to be entertainment secretary of the St. George's Leagues Club. And I have to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I've been very, very busy. I have been as busy as a one-armed taxi driver with crabs. Well, we're up Shit Creek tonight. We're up Shit Creek without a paddle. Because our advertised attraction tonight dusty Springfield. And it's fucked off. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, madam. That just slipped out. Know the feeling. We're in a bit of luck. A miracle has occurred. Because a little lady, a tourist from Melbourne, by the name of Anna, has offered to fill in. Now, she's not a comedian. She's about as funny as a burning orphanage. Hello? No, it's all right, mate. You keep the girls, but send the tractor. When this little lady Edna comes on stage, give her the clap. She's so rich.
Famous celebrated Australian statesman of modern times. He started his career as the entertainment officer at a club in Sydney and has risen to the heights of being the Australian cultural attaché to the court of St James. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Les Patterson.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's very good to be here on the Parky Show. You know, you could say this is the International Year of Australia already, couldn't you, Mike? It's been fantastic, the publicity we're getting, and largely due to the efforts of my good self. You know, it wasn't many moons ago that they thought we were a bunch of rough diamonds down there. But you know, we've got more culture than a penicillin factory.
Les Patterson is not just a guru of the arts. I'm a connoisseur of gourmet and a snacker. And an iron of a midnight feast for a couple of nice tarts. Or if I may all like my salami on their cracker. personally put the cork in the bottle. Theirs has continued with his addiction. Playing a drunk is a strange and rather salutary experience. I still love inhabiting old Les, but I'm very grateful I'm not him. You see, from my university days, I had made the miraculous discovery that a drop of alcohol before an important occasion was helpful, very helpful. And since everyone I knew drank, and mostly to excess, I believed that if I increased my dose a little, no one would notice, and they didn't, but I secretly did. By the 1960s, I was waking up most mornings with a hangover. A barmaid I knew called Veronica told me about a miraculous cure, a mixture of port wine and brandy. It's called a grappling hook. If hastily swallowed on an empty stomach, it was a punishment and a cure combined. I gag at the thought of it today, but it wasn't long into the swinging 60s that I found myself in a series of private nursing homes for thirsty people. I ended up in a locked ward in a psychiatric hospital with my despairing father sitting beside my bed. But one afternoon, I woke up to find a complete stranger sitting on my bed, on the end of the bed. He introduced himself as Tony. He told me that he was a car salesman and a happy member of something called Alcoholics Anonymous, which I knew nothing of. Well, all I knew was that it was some kind of middle-class Salvation Army sort of outfit. Sort of for reformed derelicts, all doom, gloom, ginger ale and Jesus as far as I knew. Worst of all about it, I gathered it was free. I mean, if I was going to have any kind of cure for my problem, I didn't want it to be free. It had to be Harley Street, you know, it had to be grandiose. There is no alcoholic more grandiose than one with a seat out of his pants, than one in a locked psychiatric ward. Tony offered to sign me out for a couple of hours and take me to one of those funny meetings it is. It was on the other side of town, but I had every intention of jumping out of the car at the first red light and disappearing, legging it. So I got into his Mercedes, but in the 8 miles across town, it was all green light. Well, sometime following this, I managed miraculously, and with his and many other people's help, I managed to pick up the gift of life. When I got back to London after 18 months away, I went for a stroll in the West End. I went into Soho with pleasure and a slightly triumphant feeling. I strode past the old clubs and pubs where I'd formerly spent so much time, so much money. On this morning, I crossed Piccadilly and I went down St James's Street. And halfway down there, I felt very peculiar. I felt giddy. The sun was shining, the sky was blue, the birds were singing. London was at its best. And yet, I was having a heart attack. Or so I thought. Some kind of fatal embolism, perhaps. I sat on a curb. I had to sit down. Taking deep breaths. Buses roared past, taxis, people's legs crossing in front of me. I nearly grabbed someone's ankle and said, "Quick, get an ambulance. I'm dying." Suddenly it dawned on me. What was this strange alien feeling. It was a little while before the penny dropped. I was actually happy. Somewhere along the way I'd lost all the labels to my emotions. Well, unbelievably, it was 53 years ago, and I've been more or less cheerful ever since. 60s passed in a boozy blur, but I still I managed to do quite a lot. I mean, I got a role in a musical based on a Charles Dickens book. No one thought it would run. Well, Oliver became the most successful British musical ever. I had a singing part as the Undertaker, and I understudied Fagin in London and later on Broadway. My role was Mr. Sowerbury, and Lionel Bart wrote me a special song. I also, of course, understudied Fagin, which I later played in 3 revivals. Then there were book reviews for The Spectator, shows with Spike Milligan, sketches on TV with Peter Cook, Dudley Moore. Oh, and Long John Silver. I played that wonderful role on one leg with a parrot, nibbling and drawing blood from my right ear. I also wrote a cult comic strip for Private Eye at Peter Cook's invitation called Barry Mackenzie. The character was a gormless Australian, a bit like me, an innocent abroad, treading the quicksands of swinging London. It was banned in Australia. Later on, Bruce Beresford and I made it into a successful movie, and that movie is still available on Amazon at a very competitive price, and it is screamingly funny, especially my bits. Although it was condemned, excoriated in the early days, the character of Barry Mackenzie gave birth to Crocodile Dundee, which is a sort of sanitised Basil Mackenzie. I was, I suppose, a bit before my time. I like to think so anyway. But there's a character that I invented but never performed. You see, Edna always talked about Madge Allsop. Madge Allsop, her New Zealand bridesmaid. When I came to do television, Ozzy Osbourne from Birmingham. And what a nice man he is too. Well, when I came to do a television show, I thought this person, Madge, that Edna is always talking about, needs to be seen. So we held auditions. Lots of camp ladies turned up and they were good, but not right. And then finally a woman arrived who'd been sent by an agent by mistake. Her name was Emily Perry, and she really, she thought she was being cast for a commercial, probably one of those chairs that throw you away. But she had the ability, this already elderly lady had the ability to sit still and do nothing. She was perfect. Emily had a small ballet school for children in South London. She had for many years nursed an invalid mother, and she never married and lived in a bed sit in South London with a poodle, which was better fed than her, by the way. She'd never been across the Thames, as far as I can tell. And later on, when she became a star, and very rapidly, we had to get her a visa for America, and I found out that she'd never been out of England except in 1934 on a day trip to Dieppe. Very soon, because she was extremely intelligent and interesting, within 6 months of working for me, she had met and shaken hands with every significant member of the royal family. when she turned 100, she received a telegram from the Queen. Well, a tweet, perhaps. She joined me on a tour of New Zealand once, and they were so convinced she really was a New Zealander. Of course, she wasn't a Kiwi, but they liked to think she was. And so she was given, a tank was named after her, and she inspected the troops. She was suddenly the most famous New Zealander since Kiri Te Kanawa. Well, when she died, it must be 15 years ago now, it was a terrible loss. She was 101, and as I said, she was in a theatrical nursing home for variety people in South London, a very good place. And I leant over to give her a kiss, and she said, "Oh, Barry, we had such fun, didn't we? If only I could remember what we did." Well, where did that leave me, I wonder? Am I slowing down a bit? Am I planning to retire? Really, I don't play golf. What gives me the greatest pleasure? Well, music, art, books, grandchildren. Yes, even some of them. My little granddaughters. They're gorgeous, aren't they? Wonderful thing about grandchildren is that they go away. My son Rupert sent me this picture the other day. Oh, which one? Another lot, yes. My son Rupert sent me a picture of me eating a dessert, which isn't terribly edifying. It just shows I like puddings. Oh, what else do I enjoy? Especially enjoy meeting you tonight. These are gladiolas. Now, normally, they come from Australia, they're flown in, and they didn't turn up. Of course, I used to distribute them into the audience, but I think these are plastic and they could actually cause serious damage. Edna once threw a gladiola and it struck a woman, it struck a man, and he sued. He said that it had damaged his sex life. Probably stopped him drinking. Ladies and gentlemen, they are to me an emblem of Australia, a middle-class, genteel Australia. If my mother was going out to a garden party, I'd say to her, "What's it going to be like?" And she said, "It'll be all hats and glads." That's a good name for a song, isn't it? Talking of which, why don't we sing? A journalist asked me yesterday, what would my tombstone say? I said it's foolish to anticipate an event so far away. But as I resemble less and less my passport photograph, what will a gracious, grateful nation write as my final epitaph? Hello, at last, you've heard a little of my past, from a young iconoclast till now. It's the first time the word iconoclast has occurred in any song. Yes, I wouldn't have existed if I'd foolishly persisted in pursuing a classical career. But I'm alone at last up here. It seems everybody wants a piece of me. You've stripped me down to the bone. You know every cranny, nook and crease of me. My life is no longer my own. The only place on earth I can be private, to be myself and be my age, is here on this oasis of solitude. The stage, the stage, the stage. At last, the witching hour has passed. Our time has gone too fast. That's very clear. But I'm so worried that you all might go into withdrawal. So I've devised a plan